As we head into a new year, it is now more important than ever to discuss the topics and utilize the tools that will move our Jewish community forward.
We're still connected.
Time to say goodbye to 2020.
Groups that we share the same values with.
Experiencing on your own terms.
Connecting through Judaism.
You show up because this matters.
You feel a part of something.
A series of inspiring events leveraging the leadership of Bay Area community builders, philanthropists, rabbis, academics, and professionals. People just like us who are working to make our local communities safe, equitable, and resilient.
Well, I'm excited to introduce all of you today my dear friend, Jacqueline Novogratz. Jacqueline is a change maker, a movement builder, a moral leader. She founded Acumen with the idea of investing philanthropic patient capital in entrepreneurs seeking to resolve the toughest challenges of poverty. After supporting hundreds of entrepreneurs, Jacqueline and her team recognized character as a crucial ingredient for success. And in 2020, as a consequence, they launched the Acumen Academy. She's also the New York Times best-selling author of The Blue Sweater and, of course, the Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, which many of you have received, and I hope you will enjoy as much as I have. And finally, and I'll make her blush with this, Jacqueline has been named one of the top 100 global thinkers by Foreign Policy, one of the 25 smartest people of the decade by Daily Beast, and one of the world's 100 greatest living business minds. But most important to me, Jacqueline is a dear, dear trusted friend and former business school classmate of mine. She has my infinite respect and admiration for her curiosity, her intelligence, and really her humility, which is, I know, why I can be so sure that I've just embarrassed her. So Jacqueline, so great to have you here today.
Thank you, Danny. It's so great to be here.
So let's start a little bit with you sharing a little bit about your path to Acumen. And just so you know, if you don't conjure one of your J. Peterman Seinfeld stories of being out somewhere in the world, I'll be disappointed. But tell us about your path.
Well, then I might surprise you, Danny Grossman. And a little bit of payback for your introduction, actually. Because I actually want to start with you and me together at Stanford, because in a way that was such an important crossroads that I think very much led to Acumen. By then, I had worked on Wall Street, where I had seen the power of markets, but also how markets too often exploit or overlook the poor. And I had helped build and founded Rwanda's first microfinance bank before I came to Stanford. And you had been in Russia and in India as a diplomat. And in some ways, I think the reason we initially connected is that we had also experienced some of the perils of top-down aid and development, charity, creating dependency rather than dignity. And I had absolutely concluded that the opposite of poverty isn't wealth, it is dignity, it's choice, it's opportunity. And I think you and I were both looking at Stanford for more of that idea that we would learn how to use business in service of change. And where we found it was in this very quirky group of social entrepreneurs called the Social Venture Network. And you and I were two of their first interns, if you remember, stayed up all night, where they made us work like fiends. And the blessing was not only, I think, sending you and I on very similar paths, but also recognize that there was an emerging community of people who wanted to use business in service of good. For me, it was also in service of the poor. And in some ways, the rest is history. I went on then to start Acumen in 2001, thinking about the power of entrepreneurship and the gaps in our system, that we didn't have the right kind of capital to enable entrepreneurs who weren't simply trying to earn money, but actually to solve some of our biggest problems, as you had said. clean water, energy, healthcare, agriculture, energy. And so the idea of patient capital, and you said it so beautifully, was that we would take philanthropic dollars. We would invest in entrepreneurs for 10 to 15 years. We would accompany those entrepreneurs, supporting them with management assistance, but also our social capital, our networks, our access. And we would measure what mattered, not just what we could count. And the whole premise was that we would see outsized social returns. We would say to those early philanthropists, we won't give you your money back, but we will give you change. And now it's almost 20 years, and we've invested, $150 million, and we've seen that money translated into supporting over 300 million low-income people with access to these goods and services. So the story of traipsing around may come, but probably the best example is a company called Delight, where we, in 2006, met two young co-eds coming out of Stanford Business School. They had a $30 solar light and a dream to eradicate kerosene, which was what was used by 1.5 billion people at the time who had no access to electricity. Kerosene is dirty, it's expensive, it's terrible for people's health, but it's accessible. People pay 50 cents a day to get little bits of kerosene, and if they don't have any money that day, and if you make $2 a day, you're likely not to have any money in your pocket. You just go without light. So convincing that group of people to change, to take on solar, where they had to somehow find $30 to pay for the solar light, where there was no trust, there was no financing. What we learned, and you know this as well as I do, in those communities of the poor is that the market economy is really dominated by a political economy. Everybody has their hands in the lives of the poor. So making a business work takes more than patient capital. In addition to putting the patient capital we put into Delight, we put 12 fellows, bringing talent in. We connected them to corporations so they could use their supply chains, and we bet on the right character. Sam Goldman and Ned Tozin, they weren't in it for the right reasons. They listened to the poor. They built a company that today has served over 100 million low-income people, and they've essentially helped ignite an energy revolution. And we've not only gone along for the ride, but we've gone on to be the largest off-grid energy investor for the poor in the world. And so I've learned so much about taking those bets, being seekers, and building from there.
It's really exciting to hear the kind of impact that you have. We often talk about the inputs in this work, but it's really about the impact. And you're very clear and very crisp about what that is, and I can see why that's compelling to others. I'd like to ask you. You said that you provide capital and support and assistance, and of course there's the academy, but you also have to provide tough love sometimes. And this is not about these are running businesses under very tough circumstances. Can you talk a little bit about how that is given the values that you spring from?
Yeah, and I just thank you so much for asking that, Danny. Sometimes when people hear me talk, they hear a lot of soft, like, oh, it's so great, they're focusing on the poor and they're using philanthropy and they're building these companies. But if I've learned a lot the hard way over these 35 years, and certainly 20 with Acumen. And one is that love is real love is a hard skill, and that it's so easy to be generous and to give. Justice is a lot harder, and it does require learning to go up against a status quo that stays in its place for a reason. Vested interests do not want to change. And so if you think about the energy sector, one of the reasons that kerosene has stayed so inexpensive is that you've got big mafias controlling the price of kerosene, politicians that buy votes by keeping kerosene subsidized. And so going against those interests mean a willingness to fight, to take it on. And so not only did we have to learn to work with our entrepreneurs to take on the bigger systems, but then we also had to hold our entrepreneurs to account. We had to be willing to write off investments, take corrupt entrepreneurs to court, do the right thing, not the easy thing, over and over again. And I think that's the stuff we don't talk enough about, but that's the stuff of real change. And it's where philanthropists who are really curious can open up their own sense of curiosity and understanding of what it actually takes so that we can be better enablers of those social entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders who are not just giving a service, but are actually in service of changing a system. And I actually think that's what love is.
Yes. No, I love that you're unafraid of talking about real love in the context of this work, because in most ways, this is sacred work you're involved in, and it clearly has a place. We will, as you know, many of the people on this call are philanthropically engaged, whether they consider themselves philanthropists or not. And I will come back for some more comments. So I appreciate that you put that out there. What you've just described to us is what has established you as a leader in the realm of impact investing. So why are you now calling for a moral revolution? What's behind that, and what lessons have led you to this?
So you've mentioned Academy twice, and thank you for that. Shame on me for not. As I said, I started off really thinking more on the technical side, that we needed a new kind of capital instrument, patient capital, and then saw that it wasn't enough. And quite frankly, started investing in fellows or promising young leaders to bring talent into our companies, because working in places like Pakistan, Kenya, Nigeria, India, Colombia, across the world, meant that it was very difficult for fledgling enterprises serving very poor people in far-flung rural areas to hire incredible talent. But we could identify talent and bring it in. And that there was a growing group of young people who wanted to spend their lives working on solving the toughest problems of our time. But over time, we realized that that's already now happening. And meanwhile, in the very markets in which we were working, we didn't have the same kind of talent pipeline where we were investing in those communities that were too often overlooked. And so we decided that we would build an academy, essentially as the World School for Social Change. We would identify in country by country, across race, class, ethnicity, religion, caste, those leaders who we saw great potential in, again, who had the character to make change, not just the technical skill set. And we would bet on them for 30 years with hopes that by the time they got to be our age, Danny, they would not only understand each other, but therefore they would understand their country in ways that our current crop of leaders tend not to. And I think another real lesson for me over these years has been that the global elite is more comfortable with one another across nation, race, ethnicity than we often are with people in our own nation who are different. And that's got to change. And that if you are building companies that serve the poor and that serve the vulnerable, a new skill set is needed. And that skill set goes beyond what we learned in business school, which was how to run a P&L and what it meant to actually protect the shareholders. Now we understand that if we don't build inclusive businesses that take care of the poor and vulnerable, provide dignified work, bring in internalize the externalities of degradation to the environment, and we're not going to create the world that we all need to sustain as a world. And that skill set really comes down to character. And it is a skill set that somehow has fallen out of our educational institutions, certainly of our business schools, and in the way that our corporations teach and train their young leaders. And so when I talk about moral revolution, I'm not talking about a high-handed set of rules handed down from some higher authority. I'm actually talking about a reframe of the systems in which we operate that have been so driven in my lifetime by money, power, and fame, to a system that dares to put our shared humanity in the earth at the center. And to build that means that it's time for us to reimagine all of our institutions, recognizing that too many of our current ones no longer work, not in the way that they need to work. We don't have a roadmap for how to recreate them, but we can build a moral compass. We can build a new set of practices and skills. And those are really the practices that I talk about in the book. Those are the practices that we teach our fellows. And I think what's so been extraordinary to me, Danny, is seeing in every community in which I work, and as you know, I work in a lot of communities around the world, I see this incredible human potential for change, often in the voices that are too often unheard, that we need to do a better job bringing forward and also building the capabilities of. And I think I can share some stories of COVID and how we've seen that really come to pass.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope that you will share some of those stories. In the context of that, in listening to what you just said, Jacqueline, I think it's probably evident to anyone listening that there's that you embody that kind of moral leadership, and I certainly know about you personally that there's a very spiritual approach that you bring to your work and to your life. Certainly, there would have to be a fair bit of faith in you to think about the audacity of the challenges that you've just described about changing core systems. I'm really interested to know what strengths and challenges you've encountered in leading with a kind of spiritual approach.
It's such a great question, Danny, and no one's actually ever asked me it before, believe it or not. I think the strength comes from the very definition of spiritual or religious, I do think stems from this understanding that all living things are connected, human and otherwise, and that therefore the African idea of Ubuntu, that I am because you are, or the Hindu idea of Namaste, the God in me sees the God in you, becomes a life practice. And so I think the spiritual leadership for me starts by being curious about every individual and seeing potential inside of them, and that being the driving force that I don't want to live in a world that sees the poor as hungry mouths to feed or people to be afraid of, but rather human beings just like us, that if we could find ways to unleash their potential, just imagine what we could build together. And I think the joy of my life in leading from that place has been to see just extraordinary change in the most unlikely places, and often from the most unlikely people. I recently got to do a seminar in the master course for my book that we call The Path of Moral Leadership. And one of the skills that I write about is the very overlooked skill of listening. And I talk about how hard it is to listen, particularly in an interdependent world. And I tell the story of going to meet this young man who we've just brought into our India Fellows program. It's about 110 degrees outside, and I'm in Mumbai. It's a Sunday afternoon. And the reason I want to meet Vimal Kumar is because he's from the scavenger caste in India. Now, the scavengers are the lowest of all of the the caste, including of the Dalit, or what was formerly called the untouchable caste. And there are people that have been consigned to pick up human waste for many, many generations. And I thought, how extraordinary that this man from this caste would be an Acumen fellow. And I just wanted to know him before I met all of the fellows. So I invited him to have a coffee at this little coffee day shop. And he was about 10 minutes late. And I thought, this just doesn't make sense that given power, that Vimal would show up late. And suddenly it dawned on me, oh my goodness, he may not feel confident to walk into the coffee shop by himself. And I thought, please no. And I walked outside, and sure enough, there he was, just sweat dripping down. And I said, Vimal, I'm Jacqueline. And I just spontaneously hugged him and went in, and I said, so what do you want? What can I get you? Let me get you some coffee. Do you want a croissant? What do you want? And he was like, no, I don't want anything. I don't want anything. And he finally agreed to have water at the table. And we had this extraordinary conversation. And about a year later, when I went back to India, and we were talking about his growth and who he had become, I said to him, yeah, I was thinking about that time when we first met, and it was such an extraordinary moment, and I feel like I made some real misses. And he said, yeah, I was so hungry that day. And I said, you were? Well, I asked you if you wanted anything to eat or drink. And he said, well, the reason I didn't go in is that I feared that they might ask me what I wanted and then make me pay. And I didn't have any money in my pocket. And when you asked me, I thought, well, what if you wanted to split the bill? And I couldn't humiliate myself like that. And I felt so ashamed that here I am, this great listener that had completely missed with Vimal. And I just said, I'm just so sorry. And he said, well, don't worry, because on the other hand, you're the first person that ever touched me outside my own family. And you hugged me. And he said, it was the first time I really felt welcomed as a stranger welcomed as a friend rather than interrogated as a stranger. And when I think about our policies, the way we treat our immigrants and our refugees, that this idea of what else could we do to welcome people as friends rather than interrogate them as strangers, particularly in this time when we're having such difficult time finding each other. And so I was interviewing him, a few months ago about listening. And it so happened that Vimal now is a fellow in Washington, D.C., and his life has completely changed. He's a consultant with Microsoft in diversity training. And he was opining on the Black Lives Matter movement. And he said, it's so extraordinary to see Black Lives Matter from the context of someone from the scavenger caste in India. Because on the one hand, there's so much opportunity in this country. And on the other hand, I keep thinking, what does it mean to be an untouchable in the age of COVID? In India, it means you're the one that still has to do all the dirty work, even though nobody wants to touch you. And in the United States, suddenly they call you essential, but they don't really treat you essential. And I guess, Danny, that spiritual drive has brought me to not only meet, but include some of the greatest teachers of my life. And once, of course, the universe opens that, then, we have another fellow that has a company using the principles of the circular economy where he only hires people from the scavenger caste. And he takes flowers that people throw into the river Ganges that are covered with cadmium and lead, and he wants to clean the river, and he wants to provide good jobs. So he goes to the temple priests so that they don't throw the flowers in the river. He brings the flowers into this beautiful factory, and he only hires these incredible women who've never had real jobs in their lives other than picking up other people's waste. and they make incense sticks and vegan leather, and to see again, if we could use our moral imagination, another practice, which is not to say throw out your competency and build profitable companies in ways that protect the earth and employ the vulnerable, we could solve our problems. And it's where philanthropy has such a powerful role to play, because that doesn't happen with traditional charity because it doesn't scale. And it doesn't happen with traditional markets because it's too hard, takes too long, and requires this whole new set of skills that I believe are so fundamental to the way we need to restructure our economy and our society.
Thank you for those stories, Jacqueline. In particular, I'm glad you chose the one related to the coffee shop for a lot of reasons. One, because as you've already revealed, I did live in India for a couple of years. When you hugged him, when you wrote about that in the book, I literally physically recoiled. I couldn't imagine a white woman from the West hugging this guy and what that would mean to him. I literally couldn't imagine it, but I knew it would be electric. So beautiful. And also because that story, exhibits the humility in you that I've talked about, and that I think is really important in leadership, to be humble. And because it speaks to you as a leader who, as we said before, leads with heart. I'm sure you're aware the founding prime minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, said that if we don't have calluses on our heart, we'll bleed to death. I don't think you have calluses on your heart. So I want to know how you don't bleed to death.
That is
you do hard work.
You're killing me. I go on a lot of runs.
Good.
I think that I hurt a lot, but so do I feel an enormous level of privilege, like a crazy level of privilege that I get to do this work. And I have actually seen entire nations change with some of the entrepreneurs that we are so lucky to work with. And so I can tell you ugly, horrible stories of where we've tried something and then it gets burned down, when government sabotages, when beautiful people get killed. I went through a genocide. How many friends I've lost in my life. And so I am not a big, just a fancy idealist. I have more ugly living inside of me than I would like to admit. But so have I seen the most extraordinary side of what it means to be human, the most generous side. And interestingly, Danny, it's so often the people who seem to have nothing that are so willing to give everything. And every time I meet, Kevin from one of the Delight agents at age 32, who literally grew up so poor. And as soon as he starts making a little bit of money selling these solar systems, he adopts 3 street kids. And I'm like, Kevin, you're 32. And he said, but I'm so lucky compared to them. Why wouldn't I? And we don't have those conversations enough. And, I write it in the book, but you work enough and get to know people like Kevin or Vimal or the women at the flower factory. And you start to think that, we grew up with this whole idea of the American dream: go out, make a lot of money, and then do good. But sometimes I think that the young people's African dream of grow up, make a little bit of money, and do a lot of good, and then good things will happen. I think we have a lot to learn from them. I really do. And getting back to those skills, and I think they're so connected to the skills of philanthropy, where power is always in the room, that we also do have an opportunity with these ideas of a new morality for a new economy, to practice a different set of skills, not to make ourselves smaller, but actually to make ourselves bigger. And to find that joy and almost, I mean, you know me, Danny, I'm reckless sometimes. When after 9/11, decided we'll go to Pakistan. I had never I knew Pakistanis, but I'd never been to the country. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really know what the Muslim world was about, but nobody else was going. And a wise man said, if you go and you stay for 10 years, you'll know more than most anybody else. So go, but don't get scared and leave. And I get to Pakistan, and the first day I open the newspaper, I'm sitting by myself in the Marriott Hotel, and the beheading of Daniel Pearl is laid out in picture frame by picture frame. And I thought, where am I? And I literally was like cold calling people. But I very soon, with that same level of curiosity and knowing we could do stuff, found some of the most extraordinary teachers of my life, and a culture that has also become part of who I am. And so I think that these skills of listening, of moral imagination, of daring to hold opposing ideas in tension, of understanding identity not in a way that is about my identity, identity politics, but is about recognizing we have layers of identity within each of us, and finding those ways that you can connect across identity so that you can build real understanding. Then you can get stuff done. And I look now in Pakistan, where we're 19 years, and we've got community. We've got some of the biggest examples. The only example of affordable housing with Sharia compliant mortgages for very poor people. And I think, again, we need moral revolution, in that we need to revolutionize the way we think about our moral education, which is really only to say the way we think about our education. Think about the way we do business. Think about the way we run our governments, and move away from this very small notion that what's good for me has to be good for you, and that I can only be right if you are wrong, to one where we say, all right, we're here for a very short time. How do we build solutions, starting by insisting that we will include the vulnerable and the earth, and going from there, because it ends up being good for all of us.
Wow, beautifully said. It makes me think of our prophets, if I can say it that way, the people who inspired us in the social venture network, Ben and Jerry or Anita Roddick, or who created their businesses and then sought to figure out, how to make them as socially responsible as possible. And we had the benefit, me and the business I started, and you and the organization you started, saying we're going to learn from their prophecy and start like that, which I think is beautiful about how you started Acumen. When you talk about flinging yourself into Pakistan, my word, not yours, it's another element of your book, which is just start. So in Hebrew, and there's a biblical notion of na'aseh v'nishma, which is, do, and then you'll understand. And it's like, well, wait a minute, why don't I understand and then I do? And your life illustrates why. Sometimes you start and then you learn as you go, which I think is really wonderful. I'm going to take you back. Yeah, I'm going to take you back to something you said before, which is some of the things you've learned, or some of the experiences through COVID. You certainly mentioned one of them in the context of the, of the sanitation cast. What are some of the other experiences that you were referencing?
Well, in a way, it's part of the evolution of Acumen, Danny, where we started with capital, the right kind of capital, patient capital, and we evolved to still the mainstay of what we do is that philanthropic backed patient capital. And then we evolved to for-profit impact funds. In addition, once companies start to grow to where they need, $50, $60 million at a time. Then we built an academy because we understood the need, as I said, to build character. And my dream is in 10 years, most of the people in whom we will invest will have gone through the academy so that we know that they've got the real skills and the resiliency and the values that are needed to solve these kinds of problems. We started, really focusing on metrics and measuring what matters, and ended up spinning that out as a separate company called 60 Decibels. The thing I've always known, and you're the epitome, you're so good at this, Danny, is we're both community builders. But I hadn't actually talked about community as a part of the superpower of great organizations and certainly of change. And yet, I think this is what you've always intuitively understood. COVID just accelerated my understanding of that in ways that were extraordinary. And many of our really strong companies also build communities of trust, and I can talk about one if we have time. But our community, by definition and deliberation, includes literally some of the wealthiest individuals on the planet and some of the lowest income people on the planet. And suddenly you've got this COVID moment. And it became very clear within a week that in the countries where there was lockdown, but there was no PPP, the employees and the communities served by our fellows in our companies were going to starve if people didn't do something. And so I and my board chair, we reached out to our community, and within a week we'd raised millions of dollars. We changed our model. And so you talk about trust. We said, we need your grants. We are not going to make investments. We're going to turn around and we are going to quickly deploy your money as grants to people we trust, that we know, we have worked with, we understand their character, so that they can keep jobs, ensure that that their companies and their organizations will survive into the future, and try to keep individuals whole through this. And it was just extraordinary to see the energy that was released and the innovation that was enabled. And so since I gave India stories, I'll give another Pakistan story. Sarah Khurram is a fellow that had, she was a doctor, and in Pakistan, 30% of women doctors stop practicing once they marry. And so she had started a company to redeploy this incredible human asset to provide medical advice and consultations to rural women. But rural women didn't want to pay on an app for consultation. And so she had set up 26 clinics where you would have a clinician have the app, have access to these doctors. But the poor low-income woman would just go to the clinic. Well, when Pakistan locked down, private clinics were included in the lockdown. And so she just said, all right, I'm going to make the app free, and I'm going to put a call out for more doctors. And pretty much overnight, doctors not only inside the nation, but from as far away as Australia, the United States, and Canada, all said, I'll volunteer. And the rural woman, having no other option, suddenly found the power of the app. And then government got involved. And this was a matter of weeks. And government allowed non-Pakistani certified doctors to participate in this. And now the conversation is really about how do you integrate a new way of developing healthcare, a better way that uses the best of us to provide a much more powerful level of healthcare to those who've been left out. And so, and I probably have 25 stories like that. We made about 110 of those emergency grants over the last 6 months, but 25 full-on systems changing, innovations, that we don't do enough of that trust-based philanthropy, but it requires committing to each other as well as committing to the goals that we set out. And I think as I think about our future, the right capital, the right character, surrounded by the right community. And I think, you are building and have built, all of you, such a powerful community. What does it look like to commit to each other? What does it look like to commit to the communities that you are using your philanthropy to enable? Because so often our philanthropy is short-term oriented. We get disappointed really fast and we move our money. We make 1-year grants rather than 5-year grants. We make program grants rather than unrestricted. If we would recognize that trust is the rarest currency that we have, and we started to focus on using our financial support to enable that, I think we could just do so much more. And then if we used our social capital, our networks, as well as our talents, then philanthropy starts getting redefined. That we are all in this not to do good, but we are in this because we've got some big problems to solve. And we better get serious about solving those problems because we have it within us to do so.
Love that. Jacqueline, in your book, you also talk about the stories we choose to tell. And I think there's some insight there as well about what keeps the fires burning within you, because you choose to tell these stories of inspiration and hope. And I'm sure they fuel you. They certainly fuel me and everybody I know. I appreciate your mention of philanthropy and its role and the work that we do. And I was paying careful attention, as I'm sure were, my colleagues and the people that we are in partnership with on this, because of the evolution of Acumen. So we are also now in the world of grant making and impact lending, and learning about the modalities and how to toggle between them and how to make them most impactful. With the philanthropists that you've worked with, and I know you've worked with many, what are some of the lessons you can impart to people on our call about the means of being involved and partnering in the work other than the writing of the check? That's understood. But I know that the group that has been with you, many of them since the very beginning, I can think of a few of them, have contributed so much more than just the capital that fuels the organization. So what can you share with us?
Yeah, and in a way, this idea of just start and let the work teach you, Danny, I think where it doesn't work, which is when I feel people get disappointed because they are like, I've heard about this, Stuart Davidson, and he's on the investment committee and he's on all these boards, and I want that too. And so I'm going to give you $10,000 and I would like to really be used. And I don't know who the person is. I don't know what their capabilities are. I don't know if they're going to be there for a long time or for a short amount of time. I don't know if they're going to go on vacation when I really need them. And so I'm at a loss. That's when it doesn't work. And so I would say writing the check is a good first start, because what it allows you to do is learn. Just start, get to know an organization. If you see a leader that you admire, be part of it. And then the practices of the book, listen. What are others saying? Some of the greatest conversations I've had with Acumen partners, and we say we're the Hotel California. Once we get you, you can never leave. But I'm thinking.
I appreciate your reference to the Eagles, by the way, just so you know.
You got it. I got to age myself at least 4 times.
Yeah. We just did.
But I was sitting with a group of farmers and a philanthropist, and in Guatemala, and the guy was a hedge fund guy, and he kept trying to teach the farmers math, essentially. And at one point, one of the farmers corrected him with math, and it was such a great moment. And when we left, he said, Jacqueline, like, they're really smart. I was like, they have to feed a family on 1 acre. They understand farm economics like nobody else. And he's like, what was I doing? And I said, you were trying to be useful with what you know how to do. And yet what they really needed from you was for you to be curious. And so I think that practice of listening and listening to the organization and seeing where they need you, the humility that sometimes where they might need you isn't exactly where you want to give, but the more you get to know each other in small ways, the more big things can happen. And as you said, Danny, I mean, from my perspective, the community has built Acumen. And I don't say that in any immodest way. That is not only, I mean, many people have now been with Acumen for 20 years on boards, not only on our global board, but on boards of our 100 and some odd countries, companies. They mentor fellows, and we've got 750 fellows, so there are many of them. They mentor entrepreneurs. The work that I do, Danny, that you do, you understand this. We build companies and it requires grimy, sleeves up, hard, sweaty work with a lot of spreadsheets and projections and reprojections and legal documents and investment committees. It hardly the words that connote spiritual, or I dare say too often moral. And yet if it is grounded in decidedly moral ground with that same curiosity, I think that is where you plant these seeds of mutual dignity. And when philanthropy is at its best, it is about, that word we started at the beginning, it is about love of other, and it ends up being love of the community, but not in an easy way. Martin Luther King used to say, or said, that love without power is anemic and sentimental, and that power without love is reckless and abusive. And I think that is the aspiration. The best philanthropy understands its own power, knows how to use it, isn't afraid of it, and also has the humility to realize that the way it can be used best, if it starts with that listening, with that humility, with that understanding that you're often working with people who have never had power. And so that it is your job to be the bridge and elicit the best of them rather than to prove how smart we are. And I think it takes a while to do that. But I think that that's the journey of finding ways to be involved. And if you'll indulge me, Danny, I'm going to tell you one more story. Because here's another, I'm so inspired by I wish I could speak Hebrew, but this idea of go first. In Pakistan, one of the most unlikely organizations we support, it's a nonprofit, but Muhammad Ali is a fellow who is from a very rough part of Karachi. And Karachi has one of the highest rates of child stealing, child trafficking in the world, and no system to track down poor kids. And he's based in Liari, which is a really, as I said, rough part of Karachi. But what Muhammad Ali understood is that if you have the humility to figure out who is in the community and you learn to work with the community, you might have a really powerful superpower in terms of finding these kids. And the most helpful people in this particular community are the transgender community of Pakistan. And Danny, as you know, the Hijras in India and Pakistan were, culturally very important part of both societies. But as societies have developed, they've been more and more marginalized. And the transgender people in in Pakistan tend to still sometimes dance at weddings, but very high prevalency of drug addiction, AIDS, unemployment, really marginal. But they are so proud to be contributing to finding these trafficked kids. And they have just been extraordinary in the way they've done it. And I've just fallen in love with Muhammad Ali and the work that he does. And so all we did was bring a group of philanthropists, Pakistani mostly, also some Americans, into Liari to see this work on the ground, to meet the people who were actually doing the work, to see what a business-oriented approach to being very effective and efficient could result in. And they, like me, fell in love with this group of people who seemingly had nothing and were willing to give everything. And Malik Sarwar, one of our partners, decided he was going to adopt the whole thing. And then he created a group of philanthropists. And not only did they, triple Muhammad Ali's budget, they raised money to build a safe house for the families when the families were united with their children, and for the transgender community. And they've transformed this pocket. And when I think to myself sometimes, again, it's the same thing, Danny, about the opportunity before us, is that these are some of the wealthiest industrialist families that are in conversation now, not only with the transgender people, but now the police, because it's getting increasingly legitimized with access to policymakers. Together, they've made enormous policy change at the national, the federal level, not only at the state and city level. And it's about relationship. It's about resiliency. It's about telling stories that matter. It's about humility. It's about identity. And it's about gritty, tough, relentless focus on the reason that we are here. And I don't think that there's a more meaningful way to live. It's just not the easiest way to live. And it's not always on a daily basis the happiest, but I think it is where you find the deepest, most abiding joy, purpose, and meaning.
Beautifully said. Moral leadership.
Moral leadership. I mean,
moral leadership.
Grossman. You
just
know
defined
what
it.
I'm saying.
So, you talked about something that's also in the book, and that frankly was featured in in one of these other sessions. Rabbi Lizak, who's a well-known rabbi here who works at Glide Memorial Church, walked through the Tenderloin, which I know you're aware of because you've written about that too. To be proximate, that was the notion, is be proximate to the issues. And that's what you've done, I think, with these people over time. And the other Jewish principle that, that's really important to this work is the notion that each person was created in the image of God. I mean, it's not just Jewish, it's biblical, so it's broader than that. But it's not always easy. Sometimes one falls in love and goes to Pakistan and falls in love with the entrepreneur. And sometimes, one can look at the challenges and be overwhelmed. So I think that's an important piece. Let me conclude with this question, if I may, which is, you talked about holding values in tension, which is, I love the notion. And I think it's incredibly important, especially in this world we live in that's so devoid of nuance and humility. And so my question for you is, as someone who clearly evinces humility and brings that to your work, and yet someone who is a leader going into cultures, particularly probably as a woman, where you have to really project confidence and kind of steely resolve, how do you hold those values in tension?
Well, I actually think it can be a great advantage to being a woman in the places that I work, Danny, in part because there are many places where they don't let men in. And so it's a huge advantage to be in the room, as you know.
Yes.
And also, I think I sometimes am allowed to say things that other people that men might not be allowed to say. I think what I'm hearing in your question, and maybe it's one of the things we have to get better at doing, and even when you think about the rabbi from Glide walking through the tenderloin, is the toughness and the tenderness, is we have to make really hard decisions in our families, in our communities, in our companies, in our cities. And they are painful decisions. They are not, there are winners and there are losers in those decisions. And I think it's how you make the decisions that is also a part of the work that has to be done. And the very fact where immersion is my word for proximity, of daring to go and find out, to talk to homeless people, even if the final decision is this encampment cannot stay. Dare to understand who they are and what they want. You might find things that surprise you, as indeed he did. And I've seen that over and over in my life, where that holding of both. We had a chain of maternal healthcare hospitals, and they grew way too fast. And we had to make a decision at one point. We didn't have the capital. Do you shut down a maternal healthcare hospital for the poor so that the whole company can survive? Or do you do what the whole community is asking you to do, which is to keep it functioning, even though it could take down the company? And, we shut it down. It hurt. It really hurt talking to the community about it. But I think it's that daring to make the hard decision, because you have to be accountable just as you have to be generous. In a water company, where the whole conversation is water is a human right on the one side, and water is a scarce resource and it should be priced. And I'm like, I just want to get water to the poor. So when both sides hate you, I almost feel like we're onto something. And that is a big part, I think, also, Danny, of the path of moral leadership, because we have to somehow show each other that we have more resources than we think we do, because in a time of fear, we're all pulling in. That's what we do as human beings. I saw this in Rwanda before the genocide. And then demagogues start to prey on that fear and on that insecurity, and then we blame each other. And this is a moment for the opposite. This is a moment to recognize that 1 in 4 children in America are going to bed hungry every night, where I thought we were dealing with just the poverty of inequality. You look at Southern India, and they are doing better on maternal health care. They are doing better on literacy on so many levels. We have huge problems that we have to solve in our countries. And meanwhile, the left and the right are about to kill each other. And so the skill set that we have to develop is a skill set of holding these tensions, of daring to cross lines of difference by acknowledging a tiny truth in what the other side is saying, so that you can even open the conversation and show that you are willing to listen. And we're far from that. And we're not thanked when we do that. It's hard to do it, but I think this is a time to do the hard, not the easy. And just because it's you, Danny, this is again where, even though it's so hard, the spiritual, I think, can energize it. When you go to what the Sufis say, out beyond right doing and wrongdoing, there's a field, I'll meet you there. That if we come at this not from certainty, but as seekers, with that humility, but that doesn't mean we let go of the audacity. I mean, I want to end poverty. I will never succeed, but I'm not going to stop trying. But I don't know the answers. I don't think any of us do, or we would not be in the situation that we are in. And so I really do think if there's one skill set, it is that willingness to realize that I'm not even sure anymore that there is a pure left or a pure right, maybe on the edges. But I think for most of us, if we could just take all these labels away, capitalism, socialism, left and right, rich and poor, and focus on what is the problem that we are trying to solve. And do we believe in the dignity of work? I do. I've not met any poor people that don't. Can we structure opportunities so that people can not only find jobs, but find jobs that allow them to take care of their families? Then you quickly see them contributing in ways that make us all better. Does it mean we have to do more if we are privileged and give things up? You bet it does. But in service of something better, not only for us, but for future generations. And so that's why I started off with this technical patient capital. I built this institution, and now I think we need no less than a different approach to the way each of us lead in our daily lives.
Jacqueline, as we say, from your lips to God's ears, we are we are blessed for your time today, and more than that, for the healing you brought to the world your whole life. We're so appreciative. We in the Bay Area and the work that we do have learned and will learn a great deal from you. So thank you, and thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you so much, Danny. And it is just such an incredible privilege to accompany each other in this life. And I learn more from you than I can say. So
okay.
To the future, to a better future.
Yes, to a better future. Amen. All right.
Amen.
Take care. That was so inspiring. Thank you again, Jacqueline, for joining us today, and for all of you for being with us. I was so moved to hear Jacqueline animate the stories that I had read with great interest in her book, and hearing about the many people she references who demonstrate moral leadership around the world. More than anything, Jacqueline's comments remind me of the Jewish values of chesed, of loving kindness, and of tikkun olam, of healing the world. We encourage each of you, as Jacqueline says in her book, and as she said just now, to just start. And you might just start by making a gift to the Federation's annual fund. You might just start by opening a donor-advised fund or participating in one of our community lending programs that address inequity right here in our own community. But just start. So thank you to all of our corporate sponsors, especially the Seligman Family Foundation, JP Morgan, Laura and Gary Lauder Family Venture Philanthropy Fund. Over the last 6 weeks and 6 really exciting events, many of you have joined us in crucial conversations around health, social and racial justice, community resilience, and family engagement. At the heart of these discussions have been how moral leadership and decision-making can help make the world a better place. If you've missed any of these events and you're inspired to find them, we'd love to share them with you again. All of the events are available on demand at jewishfed.org, our website. And in 3 weeks from today, mark this down, on March 10th, is our final day of Philanthropy Festival. This special main event will be a culmination of everything that we've learned throughout the last 6 weeks and discussed so far. We're delighted that Dr. Judith Rodin, a pioneer and thought leader in the fields of strategic philanthropy and impact investing, will be joining us. And she'll be in conversation with Lady Linda Rothschild, the chief executive of E.L. Rothschild LLC and founder and chair of Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism. It should be incredible. And on top of all of that, we will be celebrating our very own Carol Saul, a leader in our community who is the recipient of the 2020 Robert Sinton Award for Distinguished Leadership. It's going to be a great day. We hope you will join. We look forward to seeing you there.